the members of the reserves with training, assisting officers, and being part of the community. Throughout his 40-year volunteer career, John has volunteered tens of thousands of hours for community events such as the Hennepin County Fair, Hamel Rodeo, Corcoran Lions tractor pulls, Northwest Area JC Easter eggs hunts, Cleanup Day, Night to Unite, firearms and snowmobile safety, and working traffic control at numerous special events in Corcoran and in other cities. John also spent much of his time assisting officers with their duties, assisting at traffic crashes, sitting on tows, transporting prisoners, working storm events, and being called in to help the community. John has made an impact on all the people he works with at the Corcoran Police Department. During his 40 years of volunteering, John has worked with 5 police chiefs, 20 full-time officers, 25 part-time officers, and has mentored 52 reserve officers. With his leadership, reserve officers have gone on to be police officers, police chiefs, paramedics, dispatchers, and business owners. John is dedicated to using his knowledge and experience in making people better and helping them succeed with their goals. There are so many things that John has done over 40 years, it is hard to sum up, but John has never hesitated to help or to lend his skills to help make Corcoran Police and the community a better place. Thank you, John, for all your time here in Corcoran. It is well appreciated. While Matt is grabbing that, I do have a couple just fun facts that I looked up of what was going on in the world when you started here at Corcoran.
Invented the wheel.
So just after that.
Just after the wheel invention.
A gallon of gas cost $1.24. The first Super Mario Brothers arcade game was released in Japan. A couple #1 songs from 1983 include "Every Breath You Take" by the Police, which as well as Michael Jackson's "Billie Jean" and "Beat It." The TV show MASH came to an end, and the highest-grossing movie of the year was Star Wars Episode 6: Return of the Jedi, grossing about $250 million.
Well, John, I think the mayor summed it up well, but not only are you the heart and soul of the reserve program, you are the entire police department. So everything that we've accomplished, really want to express our gratitude. So got you at least a memento to recognize this huge milestone. So thank you so much.
I want to say thank you for everybody that came. I can't believe how much it means. And I'm looking around and seeing all these faces and thinking, these are really cool people, and I'm glad that they came. So thank you for making the effort and coming. Hopefully we can have a bit of a party and enjoy some time together. But it's been a good experience. I don't think the reserve program would have been anything like it is if it wasn't for the city itself. The people of Corcoran are, over the years, it's just been marvelous in their support of the police department. And so I want to thank everybody here and everybody in the city, anyone that couldn't be here. Thank you so much. When I came here, the first night that I worked, the first call I went to was a baby choking call. And our department policy said reserves couldn't respond off duty. Well, I wasn't really off duty. I'd been working at a bicycle event, and I was close to the trailer park where this baby was not breathing, and I went to that, and the baby was fine. But later that day, I rode for the first time with a Corcoran officer, and that was Paul Shetty. And it started to pour, and Paul said, pull in at the canopy at Donnie Mare, and we'll get out of the rain, and we did, and he said, you drive. You couldn't see the road. So I knew from that point on that this was going to be a good place to be.
Stop. We got pigeons. I got pigeons. No. Nuisances.
I have clay pigeons.
I got them.
No one sells these profit, doesn't sound.
That doesn't solve my problem. I even kept my silo and there's still everywhere.
What do you want to shoot? What do you want to shop? What's stopping you from doing it? Oh yeah.
Limited flight bullets, they can do it.
Oh, I used to shoot a subsonic. Subsonic.
Exciting as our
I had to get a lot of
I will get a print. Kevin was grabbing he texted me, he was gonna grab me the ID. Number.
Thank you, Burns.
All right, Ren.
A lot of reminiscing,
We ain't gonna stop it.
Just don't start a fire, so we have to actually open the door. What? Yeah.
One of them's closed, we can't close the other one.
We can't we just shut him?
We generally haven't, just for openness in the meeting.
Yeah, you can. Still on that, I'll get actually.
As long as there is access to it.
Access to it. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Occasionally those doors stick.
When are you gonna sing "Beat It"?
They're almost done. Mask of the singing.
Absolutely never.
Matt gets the singing.
Don't have the same vocal range.
I'd rather the one by four.
Yeah, there you go. That one was too perfect.
I thought it was great.
Song from 1983.
Great pick, man.
Thank you. All right, we'll go on to consent agenda, consisting of items A through G, which was added. G was added. Does anyone want to pull anything? Nope. Okay, then I will entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items 7A through 7G.
Can I
We had G. Sorry.
can I do something before we approve it?
Sure.
Can I move 9A and 9C to consent agenda? Can I
So
make a
if you-
motion that we add 9A and 9C to consent?
9A
Well, there's
and
nothing
9.
after it. Can I just ask a question on 9A then?
Sure.
Why do we do it now, or
Or on,
if we're gonna move, we need to take a vote to move it to consent agenda first?
Before you ask
So
your question.
Yeah.
It becomes non-consent if you have a question about it,
Okay.
yeah.
but I'm not the.
So
I
how
have
about,
Robert's
how about,
Well, we
So
can
we've
pull it
got
from
it.
consent, still put it on consent, and ask a question.
okay, I'll make a motion to amend the agenda to add 9A and 9C, was it?
Yes.
To consent agenda.
So,
Second, or I made the motion.
I made the
second.
Yeah, John made the
John,
motion.
John made the motion.
Yep. And then Alan
Alan
seconded.
Steal my motion.
I didn't know you made a motion. Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, now, does anyone want to pull anything from the new consent agenda consisting of A through,
G plus
Well.
B 9
HI,
HI.
there we go.
There we go.
can I pull, I would imagine it would be H, the park dog.
Park donation.
Formerly 9A, yeah, go ahead. Okay, that'll be pulled, and then anything else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion to approve consent agenda items B through,
It'd be A through G and I, right?
Yes. Okay, so
thank
G
you,
and I.
yes, that.
So moved. I practiced.
Second.
I can't pick up from the middle and go in there. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, and then consent agenda item formerly 9A, that was pulled.
if I may ask, because I wasn't at the last meeting, so my understanding is the Corcoran Athletic Association is dissolved.
Currently, it is not. It's still technically in formation, is my understanding. They are attempting to dissolve because this is the last of their funds. And rather than having to stay as like whatever their tax exempt status is, they would like to donate the money, dissolve the association,
Okay.
and then,
So this is the last of their
Yep.
funds, there's no, okay. All right, I'll entertain motion to approve.
Okay.
H.
Second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay,
May I mention something?
sure.
As we just thank John, I can't thank Kevin Dale and that associate enough for everything they've done. I don't know if we'll do a recognition for that in the future, but
we have
did a couple of
recognized Kevin Dale specifically in the
Yeah.
past. And then there's also a sign on the press box as a thank you for building the press box.
I do it publicly too.
Absolutely.
It's been a huge part of our community for many, 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 many.
Yeah, before you were on, we had that.
Yep. Yep, I just, thanks.
Awesome, yeah.
Okay, then we will go on, let's see, we don't have any planning business. Unfinished business just got cut in a third, so we just have, we'll have public comment opportunity on 9B, which is City Center Drive in 79th Place. Accepting plans and specifications and authorizing bids.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sure.
This is kind of a format question.
Sure.
Of the meeting. I didn't think about it until now, but if we move something from the agenda to consent agenda after open forum, where it would have been allowed public comment, now we no longer allow public comment for the items that we move.
They can still
Yes.
speak at the public comment period for that section, but it would be.
But the item is already
Yeah.
been voted on.
Yeah.
So,
Well, we still wouldn't have open forum, they wouldn't have, but at the public comment for that.
For those
For
2
9.
items.
Right there, yeah.
I mean, open forum should probably open for items on consent agenda too, if somebody so
Yeah.
wishes to choose.
Yeah.
But I wonder in the future if we should have this, an order of decorum, that if we're gonna move anything to consent agenda,
We have,
it should be done at the approval of the agenda.
We could certainly look at doing that. I think it's really a,
No, but I think you're right, I thought of that too, like, or we could have had a quick thrown in public comment opportunity, but technically though, I don't think you need to have, we have spaces in the public comment opportunity. By Robert's rule, we actually don't need to have them.
We have that
we,
on the flyer,
yes.
Right.
but.
You could open it up after moving it.
Yeah, I could do that too.
Just something to think
Yeah.
about in the future.
Might wanna consult with the guy down on the end.
Yeah.
too.
How are we doing on our basic making up legalese as we go?
We're completely compliant. You're right, it's discretionary public forum, so you can move it around as you see fit.
Okay.
Anyone joining us virtually who'd like to speak at this public comment opportunity can press *9 or click reactions and raise your hand. Mayor and council, at this time, no one's raising
Go
their
on
hand.
to 9B.
Excellent. Thank you, Kent. I have your presentation. One moment.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Kent Torby, City Engineer, and I'm here tonight to get authorization to go out for bid on the City Center Drive, on utilities and some landscaping and streetscaping. We'll be looking for some input on the lighting, on the landscaping, and then we'll be giving an overview really on the Loop, Rush Creek. And really in the master sewer plan, it's not that old, there was a lift station at St. Therese and the big lift station down in Rush Creek. Since Rush Creek went first, the big lift station went in and this lift station went in. So there was some synergy here, with the projects and how they came together. We'll have the orange or yellow area of Rush Creek, or, City Center Drive, and there'll be sewer and water in there. Then we have 79th on the south end, and just south of that is a few houses. The pink is part of the future linear park, but also we're bringing up a 16-inch water main as part of the trunk water system from the hydrant down across from St. Thomas Church. So for the residents just south of here, it'll be bored under the driveways, but yet the city's in process of using. So there's different funding sources with state aid, with city bond, with developers, and it's all fairly complicated. As far as County Road 116, there will be turn lanes. And then we've got a few alternate bids. And we'll be looking at, I said 16 inches coming up to the southern end of City Hall. We'll be bidding as an alternate to bring it to the northern end. And then hooking City Hall. Again, it's consistent with our comp plan. It's not absolutely necessary at this point. But we're going to have a contractor on site and we try to make value-based decisions. And then also we have some tree grades being bid out to get a cost of going to tree grades. So that's an overview of a lot of moving parts and a lot of dirt moving south of here, and there'll be a lot of utilities going in. The plan would be to get the utilities in the ground this fall, get City Center Drive back up to Randall, and then connect over to Rush Creek. So it won't be done until we get into next year. But St. Therese is in communication with the city and they're fine with our utility schedule to get them service. Next slide, please. So a few of the streetscape furnishings. The electrical companies, they have their standard lights. So lights that deviate from that would be city owned. So the ones that are shown here would have banner arms, flagpole mounts, and they are designed to a code standard. And that gives you a standardization as you move forward through the downtown. We'll have a bid for boulevard trees on City Center Drive and a portion of 79. You kind of want to be careful here. The western half of 79 is not installed because development is still going some. So that's put in trees and then have more activity south with trees would be the risk. And then we'll have some enhanced pedestrian crossings that are consistent.
They're letting us know they're having a hard time hearing you on the mic. Would you mind, it's portable, yeah. That'd be great. Thank you.
Better?
Thank you.
Okay. And then we have enhanced pedestrian crossings that are consistent with the recent policy, draft policy, I should say. Next slide, please. So we talk about City Hall and connecting to City Hall. Sewer will be connected on the south end. And then possibly water service comes up here to the north end because the well's on the north end. Again, we'll take a look at the price of bringing the 16-inch and then we'll coordinate all the local City Hall disruptions and utilities. Next slide, please. So here's the schedule and the cost was taken from your packet. And it's basically what I covered anecdotally earlier. Going to be a lot of utility work going in this fall and bring City Center Drive back up to gravel or rough grade, and then finish the roadway and landscaping next spring and summer. Next slide. So at this point, I'll pause or stop And then there's a few questions we're looking for direction on. One would be the lighting. And there's a funding question up there about ARPA for connecting City Hall. And then really about the overall streetscape. So it's a big project, and we've kind of given the overview, but we would like feedback reinforcing some early thoughts you had on lighting or landscaping and streetscaping. So with that, I'll pause.
Any questions?
I have a question. The lighting that doesn't have like the banner option and the flagpole, it becomes city-owned, and I assume it's more expensive. Do you know what the price delta is between having a city-owned light and then also a one we get from the power company?
We'll know when we take the bid, so when the bids
Oh,
come
so
back,
we'll get that.
we'll get a unit price.
I see, okay.
Probably pushing $5,000 is my estimate on the fly,
On
per light.
Per light.
The utility providers basically, almost essentially put them in for free.
Yeah, that's what I thought, because
and-
we've done that multiple times, yeah.
You know, so it's basically,
It's just the one light.
yeah, but it's just that one carriage light that you see in the single-family development. So with this being in the downtown, we had that conversation about being a little different lights, and that's the light that we've selected, and we wanted feedback if that would work or not. So it's the light type and style. There was some conversation about hanging baskets, I think, at a previous council meeting, and we really tried to look at value versus maintenance versus aesthetics, and that's really where the tree grade kind of alternate came from. If we're putting mulch around all these trees, we might have to do it a couple times a year if you know, to make it look nice. And we start balancing that with flower baskets and then the amount of resources to keep watering them. And we tried to find that balance. So all these will also have an electrical plug on them. So if we're doing any maintenance, we can plug in, or if we wanted lights, we can wrap the lights up. So really the only kind of feature we carved out is the hanging baskets. We didn't think there was enough value there. We can certainly add that back in if that's council's purview, but that's really the only amenity that we
Have you ever
kind
been
of.
at Green Lake, Minnesota? Where they have, it's rural and they have hanging baskets like every quarter mile. And you're like, who takes care of this? But they look super awesome.
They look awesome if you're there to maintain them. What's that?
They have them in Rogers too.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So just full disclosure, we pulled those out in our current plan. If they need to go back in, we have time to regroup and put them back in.
Totally fine.
Yeah.
Can I ask you a question? Do you have an estimate for tree grades? Is there an estimate for the lighting in here at all, or no?
There should be a line item for it. I can get back to you and find it here quick.
And then my second questions to those are, like the bid that's listed, the estimated bid for tree grades, is that just in that area for the estimated number of trees, or is that for the whole development out of the downtown area?
That's for the roads that we're building, so just city center, yep, and just the boulevard trees, so not any trees off, just the trees, the boulevard trees that we have, which is primarily what we're installing.
So I think with both, we need to really think about a per unit price, and then once we go down a path, we're gonna wanna be consistent throughout that downtown area development, so have an estimate of how many lights in that whole area and how many trees, you know, per foot, so we have an idea what the total build-out cost is going to be. Maybe get down a path and say, well, 183,000 is not bad in today's terms for only doing 2 streets, and it comes out that's $1 million plus when it's all said and done.
So a couple things there. So the projected unit price per street light is $7,000. So we'll know what the actual price is. It's a individual line item. So when, you know, this is just seeking bids, so that could vary, but they're in here is $7,000 per light, and then they're projecting the tree grades and the concrete frames around them are $2,500 per tree. The only comment I will add, Councilmember Schultz, to yours, and I don't disagree with it, we're a little bit unique in terms of this was city property, and how we approach development is any future roads would not likely be on city property. So that would
So we
be,
could charge
that would
those
roll into, you know, we're complying with our standards. Those standards would be required, you'd have that option, and then they would be constructed with the development. So we're unique here because we own the property when we started. So that's why we're kind of planting the flag with this. So we certainly wouldn't want to pick lights and spacing and grates and then also change it the next block. So that's why we wanted to kind of set expectations here, is because what we do here is what we'll want to mimic through the rest of downtown as a recommendation. So to your point, yes, what we do here is very critical because staff will use that as the recommended requirement going forward, at least connecting down to 10. Because we're in the north end of that road per our planning document.
And both items we have standing on, and we could require that without them coming back with a PUD ask to include it?
I believe we can. I'm not a planner, but I believe we can. I mean, the engineering team, their landscape architect followed the guidelines in the document. And the spacing in the document supported by public safety for the lights and the trees. Our planning team reviewed it and it's fine. So I believe that we're in compliance with that. And I think that once you plant the flag, that gives you more credence to requiring that to be mimicked all the way down. So my opinion is it would.
We probably want to make sure we have standing on that for both. I mean, I can definitely see it for a street light, but about a tree grate, maybe we can make arguments that.
Well, we can certainly get that answer back to you.
Yeah, no, it's a good thing to think about, and I'm glad you brought up the point that this would not be, these would be private development on the other, so our costs would be capped at whatever we bid on it.
Assuming we didn't buy the property and then develop it, which is not anywhere near a policy, but under that assumption.
That's a good assumption.
But yes, and so I would say that in terms of City Center Drive, right? There's a lot of other side streets in downtown that would come under review. But I would say mimicking the spine of City Center Drive, we'd have a lot of, I think, justification to say match what we did. This is what we want. And this complies with our vision. So I would feel comfortable saying we can match the spine. I think the future developer would want to match the spine, but maybe that's just my opinion.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah.
Just, I don't want to start a big snowball rolling down the hill and stuff. Snow removal, those kind of things along these streets with the trees down the middle and on both sides. What added costs is there going to be for public works to be able to do snow removal in a big winter and such? And I know no public works is happy with trees right on the boulevard because they can't push snow back and stuff easily and those kind of things. We've thought about that, we've looked at that, and there's gonna be an added expense on snow removal on these roads. Okay.
Yes, I think with the kind of the vision of what's in the downtown district, you're going to get increased maintenance. So we did spend some time looking at how to minimize that. For instance, the tree grade alternate is a way that we think you start talking 10, 20 years down the line, it's going to pay for itself a lot of times over. I don't have those numbers for you, but mulch is expensive and it's labor intensive. And really, if you want it to look nice, it might need to happen multiple times in a year. So you start pricing that out, and the tree grades are appealing. A lot of the challenges we have is timing, right? We have, a lot of times if maintenance comes up at the exact same time, we have to either go slower at it or pick one versus the other. And so this area, it's going to have expectations on it as we grow, and so the challenge of getting there at the time where everyone wants us to is certainly a challenge for us. So we're aware of them. We're trying to build, like I said, carving that stuff out. We're trying to nick it where we just feel like it's going to be not value added.
Got it.
Will the trees need irrigation in order to stay viable, given how much concrete will be there? Is that part of the plan?
I can follow up on you, like if they have a drip, and a lot of times they have like a little irrigation drip for that. I don't know if that's in here or not, I'd have to follow up with you on that detail.
I'd hate to have a water truck have to run down there all the time.
Yeah, it's
It is
not
standard.
intended to run a water truck down there, so I will verify what we have in there to manage that. A lot of times, at least I've seen in other details, they'll kind of even create, and I don't know if this is in there, but other places will create like they'll put like a sand pocket there, right? So, we're in heavy clays, and they'll have a couple feet of sand, and so the rainwater will sometimes almost get in there and then stay. I don't know what we're doing, that's a good question, I can follow up.
Thank you.
Could we even look at doing some type of irrigation through stormwater pond?
We have that large pond that we have makes it easier to do that. Yes, I think we have the ability to do that. I don't know the details of the irrigation system off the top of my head tonight, I apologize, but we do have that capacity, and centralizing and sub-regionalizing those ponds allow for that to function better. I don't know if you remember if that, I think we built that in, but we didn't fall back on needing to do it, but we can certainly include it, I thought, is where we
It could
landed.
be retrofitted.
Yeah.
It's a big pond, and that's what you want.
We don't want to be stuck in by permit reasons to do it, but it's certainly something we can choose to do. And all of the medians would be irrigated, so we do have an extensive irrigation system to maintain all this. So again, I'll dive into the details on the irrigation and have that for you. We'll likely be back in front of you on the 10th, presenting final bids, and I can make sure we have that information clarified.
That'd be great.
I also wanted to raise an issue around tree selection. I brought this up with staff a little bit over the weekend. Has anybody else had any issues with Japanese beetles just being attracted like magnets to lindens and elm trees?
And
So
birch trees.
it might be good for us to think, because there's going to be a park right next to this area, where the city will be responsible for maintaining turf or whatever the plantings will be, to look at trying to focus on trees that tend not to attract beetles. So dropping those two and replacing them, I think, would be a good long-term decision.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are you suggesting a revision to the code, limit striking a couple trees, or are you just saying in this specific case?
I think in this specific case for certain, and I think for the downtown district, because there's a very limited number of trees that are allowed, we might want to relook at some of the less desirable ones now.
Okay.
But for this, I would just look at replacing those two with something else.
And the landscape architect provided some potential alternatives for those that seem to be resistant to Japanese beetles.
Oh, and so we could decide that
We-
at a later.
So we could look at adding that to or changing out the landscaping for that.
It'd be great to see what some of those alternatives are, and just a similar look and doesn't have that problem.
It's not one tree though, right?
What do you mean?
We're not gonna end up with one tree and one tree.
There's
I think
4
there-
on there now
Oh,
that are
okay.
not elms and lindens, and if you replace those two with a different 2, you
Yeah,
still have
okay. I just don't wanna end up with like, really add Dutch elm.
and they have to cut everything
and
down.
all this
I don't want to
thing.
do that.
Yeah,
The whole way down, yeah. Gotcha.
and ash trees today.
Yeah. You want variety.
Ideally, we should for the 10th. So I can bring it back to the next meeting.
We could bring that, Kevin and I are just talking because we'll want to have that included, the tree selection as part of the bid package. So if there are particular, we can bring that back on the 27th.
Yeah, and then if there's a change, we can just do that by addendum.
Cool.
We would just want to either tell us to bid as an alternate, which is easy. You can say bid those other 2 recommended ones as an alternate and then decide later. Or you can tell us to make those changes, or we can bring back like another report where you have that. But we would want to select that, so rather than change ordering it after the fact, you always get better market prices prior. So we'd want to try to make that decision before the end of the month. And there's different ways to do it.
I think bidding alternates for the trees and for the irrigation for the trees would be
Okay.
desirable.
is that, would you like something an alternate for swapping out those 2 species as recommended by, okay, is that?
Works for me.
Yeah.
No?
Nothing.
Okay, got it.
Good.
So, yeah. On the utility, extension, would that all be ARPA?
I think we were looking at ARPA for sure for the water portion, and we would look at it for the sewer as well.
So the sewer is maybe chopped up a little bit more, a little more detail. The sewer septic system is impacted by the project. So I think that's absorbed into the project because it needs to get updated. So it will basically remove the pumps and the septic, and it'll be free flowing gravity down to the system. So that's passive system. But the one question I have is like the SAC and WAC charges or whatever. We have to get some clarity on that. Maybe end up being a potential ARPA expense. We have to do some more thinking on, because you know the connection charges and that would that trigger a project? Is that a project expense or is that our expense? So we maybe have to noodle on that from the sanitary sewer standpoint. But the water, the alternate water, basically going a little further up 116, and then the service and all the water connections would be proposed to be ARPA funded. Because they're not a result of the project.
And we'd have some clarity on that by the time we're getting this back.
Yeah, I think we would want to know, some of the things we want to know is if ARPA, that we're researching, if ARPA triggers different requirements. Like, we are using state aid, so that triggers the prevailing wage. That's in Minnesota and other grants in Minnesota, that's really the ultimate, but sometimes with the federal dollars, they get a little more exotic. And so I think our preliminary analysis is that it's not anymore, but we're just trying to refine that.
Yeah.
And again, that's an alternate, so we would confirm that funding source prior to including that alternate. I think from a staff standpoint, employee standpoint, there's a lot of interest in improving our water at the city hall, for the public even too, but just on a side note.
Any other questions?
We answer all of them. Or you can touch on ARPA.
The ARPA one
Or
we
do
did.
for like comments and landscaping.
Landscape.
I'm fine with the lights going off a bit on that.
Okay.
I think it'd be nice to have some type of more of a community feel to it
Yeah,
as you drive down the road.
definitely. A little different. Would we, to get some of the alternates that we asked for and the additional information, would you want us to table everything or no?
No, I think
I
by
think
direction,
just
or whatever
consensus.
that, by direction, ask us to incorporate that.
Okay.
That's, plans are 98% done, so those are, I mean, we always issue a addendum, it's like, you know, on a project this size, so
Yeah.
I'm comfortable with by direction and adding an alternate.
Okay. Anything else you want to add? I'll entertain a motion to direct staff to incorporate those and to accept plan specifications and authorize bids as recommended.
So moved.
Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. 9C was added to consent. So we're on to 10. We have a public comment opportunity for 10A, which consists of A sub 1 and sub 2, and a 10B. Which is a work session.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. Anyone in the audience who wants to speak can come to the podium, state your name and address. Anyone joining us virtually can press *9 if you're on a telephone, or click reactions and raise your hand if you're on an electronic device. Mayor and Council, at this time, no one is raising their hand.
Okay. We'll go into 10A.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Before you, for 10A, we have a discussion we had started back in 2022 when the legislature approved the edible cannabinoid products, the sale of that. So in 2022, in August, we went ahead and put a moratorium in. And since then, staff has been working and monitoring what happened at the legislature, and this year at the legislature, they legalized additional cannabis products and things like that. But one of the things that we need to do is to follow up with the edible cannabinoid products, and then we had a few other things that we wanted to look at as we're finishing out that moratorium and setting our regulations. And so there are three main items that we wanted to talk tonight to you all about related to the cannabis ordinances, or the cannabis legislation, and that is the use of cannabis in particular public areas such as parks. We wanted to talk about regulations related to edible cannabinoid sales, and then drug paraphernalia and some changes related to that. And then we have a follow-up section that's related to the larger legislation that happened in 2023 and putting a moratorium on that. So there's a few policy questions that we wanted to go through for both of those items, and wanted to take a few minutes to talk about those with you tonight.
Perfect.
So with cannabis, we wanted to know and better understand if the city wants to regulate the public use of cannabis in parks. I wanted to get some feedback on that. That seems like something we'd like to do. We've seen it in other cities.
Can we ask questions before we start with the
Oh,
specific? So, as I understand it, and I'm glad you're here, John, it's still illegal federally to use recreational marijuana and cannabis, correct? Isn't that right?
It is still a Schedule I controlled substance, and yes, federally banned.
Suppose something is federally banned, and it's illegal. So it's legal by the state standard, but illegal by the federal standard. So suppose Matt pulls someone over and somebody's got marijuana in their car, or a bale of marijuana, or however much marijuana they want to have. The state is not going to prosecute him. Can the city prosecute a federal crime?
No.
So, okay. So so who prosecutes a federal crime if a local, do you guys even, I assume like if somebody kidnaps someone, which is federal and state crime, you guys can, even if it wasn't a state crime, you could arrest somebody for a federal crime, right? And then what do you do with that? If it's a federal crime but not a state crime. So suppose we said, you know what, I'm not going to pass a law that is against, I'm not going to enact a law that is illegal federally. What would we do even if we said, what if we said that? Who has jurisdiction? What happens if someone breaks a federal law that the state isn't going to enforce? And I'm sure the county isn't going to enforce because they don't enforce anything, whether it's illegal or not. So what would happen?
Well, I'll kind of touch on it briefly. So the federal crimes would be referred to a federal prosecutor, and they would review it and determine if they were going to pursue federal charges. As it relates to the controlled substances, the way a lot of the laws are structured. So, for instance, kidnapping has a state charge.
Yeah,
the
so
federal
it's
charge.
immigration.
But
Immigration is not so how do you enforce immigration, which isn't the state is sort of like we have some sort of sanctuary status.
So the investigation of those federal types of crimes is typically the responsibility of federal law enforcement. A lot of the federal crimes have local overlap. So, for instance, if you had a bank robbery or, you know, immigration where the investigating agency requested to collaborate. You know, a local agency would work with the FBI for a bank robbery. A local law enforcement entity may work with federal law enforcement if they're requested to assist on the investigation for immigration enforcement. But the purview for the legal charging would happen at the federal level. And so typically a lot of those are joint investigations. Also, because of that, for instance, the federal crimes often have a different element. So kidnapping, there is a federal crime for kidnapping, but it's usually crossing state boundaries. So when you run into jurisdictional issues between different states.
Yeah.
And that's why all of a sudden you know, a lot of the federal crimes are overarching and different than the state crime of kidnapping. So as it relates to, I believe, you know, scheduled controlled substances, you know, most states would regulate the individual possession and maneuverability of it, where, you know, the federal crimes, I think, focus more on the trafficking, the transportation across state lines. So what I'm trying to get to is there's usually slightly different crimes geared towards the conduct that's occurring. So we do have authority to assist in those investigations if we have a reason to be part of that purview. I think where marijuana becomes so different, and I think a little bit harder to maneuver is, as you pointed out, being federally illegal, but actually the state having mandates on cities to allow certain things makes it pretty complicated as far as the.
Is smoking weed constitutionally protected, John? Just wondering. Just
I don't think we have a ruling on that yet.
Okay. Because technically you can, as a local authority, make things freer, but you can't make things less free for constitutional protections, right?
Typically, yes. Typically, you can be more restrictive, but not less restrictive than the original law. Correct.
So if we were less restrictive than state, but equal to that of the federal law, we wouldn't be violating any constitutional restrictions of constitutionally protected activities.
No, you typically, as you move down in size, so federal, the state can be more restrictive, local can be more restrictive typically, although this particular legislation, as Matt pointed out, stops you from doing that in several places and restricts your ability to ban it or curtail it in certain ways.
But does the state have authority over the federal government to ban us from making something illegal that's federally illegal?
No, but the issue here comes down to, I think what you're touching on is enforcement, right? So the FBI isn't going to come knocking on anybody's door for a small amount of marijuana. They haven't and they won't. They have no ability to enforce something like that. They leave that to the individual states, and states have made up their own minds as to what they will and will not make a violation, as Matt said, of state law. And an increasing number have legalized marijuana or allowed it in different ways. And that's what we're seeing here from 342. Yeah.
Can I ask what a curtailment is? Can you give an example of what we can't do under the current state law?
So is that to me or to the chief?
To you.
Okay.
You raised it to John's question. There's some things that are prohibited by the state that we can't curtail or ban the use of, right?
Right. So for example, in the new law, you're not able to outright ban cannabis businesses after your rights to a moratorium expire. Unless, you're not, they will do it completely unless there are sufficient number in the county you're in to avoid you having to allow one such business within your city limits. It's based on a standard of 12,500 population.
Oh, hell, that'd be easy, don't you think? In Hennepin County?
It very well may be.
Everywhere.
Yeah, so but the point would be that that's also part of the reason to consider the moratorium, is because it gives you some time to plan for that. It'll also allow some of these things to be established and to allow you to evaluate kind of what that threshold is at that point and whether you even have to allow one. Most likely, the legislation that you're going to be putting into effect if, for example, your goal was to completely disallow cannabis businesses, would be to say that you will only allow the minimum number that you're required to allow, one in this case, if the county has not met the threshold, in which case you would say they have, and the answer is 0, right? So, so you'd kind of plan for it that way. But yeah, the law does curtail certain local authority. I mean, for example, several cities entered into a licensing program for edible cannabinoids. It's believed that that will be preempted once the state starts licensing these vendors on October 1st. So those are kind of going away. There's some things they're opening up the law in other areas, but they're also kind of force feeding a little bit too.
So if we don't break federal law, we will be breaking state law. We get to pick whether we break federal law or state law. That's it.
There will be a contradiction either way, yes.
Is the state gonna send in people if we decide that the feds aren't gonna bust people for marijuana? Or is the state gonna send in the troopers here if I vote that I'm not comfortable enacting laws that are opposite of what federal laws are?
I don't expect the state will intervene at this. The intervention will come at the local level from probably local businesses that will seek to enforce their rights under the state law and preempting any lack of regulation that we may have at the local level. So that's probably where your challenge will come.
I understand. Either way, I think the language allows us to have a moratorium longer than normal, January 1st, 2025.
Yes.
I think probably is a good idea for a number of reasons.
I'd rather do something further out after others that put things.
We're not able to.
Yeah, Mayor,
That's
Council, if I may, the authority you're given in a typical interim ordinance is 1 year. And in this particular legislation, the legislature decided that you're probably going to need a little more time, mostly because the Office of Cannabis Management, which they're setting up and hadn't been established at the time the law passed, really is going to need time to generate model ordinances, things like that they're going to circulate. So they have given you authority under that law, under 342, to impose a longer than usual moratorium. And that's that January 1st of 2025 date. But that is the limit. That exceeds what you usually would.
What I'm saying, instead of us cutting the path and forging forward and setting rules and stuff like that, I'd rather see somebody else do it, see how long it goes before we start spending time trying to tighten things up. That's just me. And if that's the maximum date, we can start working on it as it gets closer, but we have examples of what other cities have done.
Well, yeah, well said. And that's sort of the purpose and plan as far as the moratorium goes. But what you have to remember is we're kind of bifurcating this issue into two separate buckets, right? We've got the higher potency stuff that was just approved in 2023. That's what will be the subject of the moratorium. And then you've got the products that we dealt with in 2022. That's the edible cannabinoid products that can't exceed so much THC, that are now referred to as lower potency hemp edibles. But they are defined under the new law. There's new regulations there as well. But ultimately, they were legalized in 2022. We chose to put a moratorium to block their sale within the local confines here. But basically, that's going to expire next month. When that happens, the new law, 342, which now will be in effect at that point, will say that they can go wherever city zoning doesn't block them from going. There's no limit on the amount. The city is tasked with the oversight for them. We have to do the compliance checks, etc. The reason for bringing up this other ordinance concurrently is to curtail where these businesses would be able to go in a sensible way for the city, and proposing in what zones and how many, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't do an absolute ban, but we can decide time, place, and manner where they can go that's reasonable for us. The other two restrictions that Jessica alluded to are really also authority given under 342. One is 342, and that's the public use. You're able to, they give you authority in that law to ban public use, subject to a couple limitations. The way that I've written this is basically just to take all the authority they give you and carve out only what they carve out, right? The second part of it, something Chief and I discussed in great detail about drug paraphernalia. And basically, the concern is this is separate from 342, but at the same time this law was passed, there was another series of changes that were made to a different law, 152, that deals with controlled substance crimes. And one of the things that was changed was this tweak to 152.025, which deals with fifth degree possession of a controlled substance. And basically, there's an exception in the law that says residual amounts, that are found in drug paraphernalia. Now, when they were talking before, marijuana was what it was. We were talking about that as a controlled substance, was carved out. Marijuana has been carved out from that statute, but now they've added to that list, in addition to marijuana, small trace amounts or residual amounts of other controlled substances. Now, the effect of that can be that now a trace amount of methamphetamine in a pipe, for example, during a vehicle search is technically not illegal. So that is the reason for this regulation, and it's not because we necessarily want to task our police department with looking for pipes everywhere. It's to preserve the status quo related to search. Because in this case, if there is an indication, for example, a dog sniff or something along those lines indicating the presence of a banned substance like methamphetamines, and a search is conducted, and for example, let's say a pipe with a residual amount of methamphetamine made legal by the present law is found, but no other methamphetamine is discovered. Let's say illegal weapons are, or something along those lines. That search potentially could be invalidated. We don't know what courts will do with that yet. This is sort of to stay ahead of that, because it's still a crime in Corcoran to have that same pipe. So that's the reason for that one.
Thanks for explaining that. I think that kind of covers the main items.
That outlines the three kind of areas, and so really want to have some discussion on whether or not we want to regulate cannabis in the public use. Where do we want to do those sales? Any fee schedule changes or ideas that we have. Staff had in the budget section the maximum fee. We can only charge half of that, and then just want to talk about prohibition of drug paraphernalia, and wanted to talk about having a public hearing. Staff would recommend having a public hearing, just to be as transparent as we can about changes in law such as this, but wanted to get feedback on those items specifically related to what we're now introducing as Chapter 119 of the City Code.
May I ask one more question? Please. Do we have inquiries now?
We do not have inquiries now in terms of the sale. We have not yet had any applications that have included it. I know that we had at least one phone call asking if a piece of land could be used for the growth of it, which we would cover as we do the further study.
Well, we've
So
had pieces of property that have.
They had asked to see if before the law had been formally enacted earlier during session, they had asked if we had received a question about a few pieces of agricultural land, if they could utilize any of those for the growth of cannabis.
Can we have people ask if you could take it over?
No one's,
I don't yet.
no one's put any
But I'm just
formal
saying,
application, we've just had one
With all
question
this
that I'm
happening,
aware of.
We've had areas where people have grown hemp, I'll say that, cannabis, but there was no regulations, and now we're putting forth regulations.
Well, if I may, yeah, the regulations that legalize the edible cannabinoids or the lower potency hemp edibles and the products related thereto, we're not altering that. That remains, will be status quo under state law, but for the 3 regs we're talking about tonight. The moratorium is only going to apply to the cultivation of the higher potency, the 2023 legislation stuff.
That makes sense. I know of 3 places that 2 or 3 years ago, they grew it and didn't think, oh, we had nothing like this. So just had to ask questions if anybody's asking about it. Thank you.
Sure, and I'm not sure the details of those,
Yeah.
Councilmember Van Camp, but it's possible they were doing so as a part of the medical cannabis program or something along, which is also exempted from this as well.
Probably what it was the
Sure.
medical side, so thank you for that clarification.
Matt, can I ask a question? Oh, I was gonna ask one too, but I only want your opinion. So, currently, possession is a crime, and there are crimes committed while being in possession, right? So if you're doing meth and you carjack someone, you will get a ticket or whatever for carjacking. So meth was the thing that caused the crime in theory, impaired judgment. So then they smashed the car into a tree or whatever happened. And then there are situations like where you happen upon someone who is high, and then you can cite them for being high because they're using an illegal substance. What's your opinion on, so if everything's okay, will our city's crime rate go down because we won't bust people for being high? Or will it go up because people will be more fluid in their drug use and do stupid things?
That's a
So,
crazy question.
so in Minnesota, it's not illegal to be high. It's not illegal to use the drugs. It's illegal to possess the drugs. So the technical crime is the possession itself.
So, yeah.
So what kind of, if you're asking me to speculate the correlation of, I don't know how many people would be under the influence that could, and of those which would be predisposed to commit criminal acts while they were under that influence. So I couldn't guess what would happen to our crime rates. I mean, as a matter of technicality, crime rates on a technical level would likely go down because there was less criminal. If it's not a crime to possess anymore, that's a crime that we aren't able to arrest and prosecute. So as a matter of technicality, by volume, crime rates could go down, but the types of crimes might change if there's impaired driving or crashes or traffic-related dangers that could be created by it, or other, as you said, unpredictable behavior that might be illegal, whether that's household, family crimes, or otherwise. So I apologize for not being able to give you a direct answer, but it's obviously a pretty interrelated
It'll be interesting.
thing. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that analysis, but.
No, I think that's well stated. It's anybody's guess as to how it will be. I mean, there are those that feel that it's just an extension of alcohol, and then there are those that feel that there's a whole other murky side of this that nobody's really looking at.
Okay, I didn't mean to distract.
Well, and I can comment on what I've heard from law enforcement partners in other states where they have seen this. Now, each state has their path to legalization is different, so the nuances mean a lot in how this plays out. But from the law enforcement perspective, they have noted that there's been substantial increases in on the human services end of things, and the law enforcement involvement in that is more limited, but social services as it relates to another legalized substance, and we deal in child protection as it relates to alcohol sometimes. Now you might, as the frequency and availability increases, you may run into more, familial issues or neglect issues, things along that nature. So the cost to society manifests itself in a lot of ways. They do see the roads become more dangerous, there's more traffic crashes, and there are other components of that. And I think, one of the big reasons why the state looked at this was, as they correlated it to disparate outcomes in the justice system, and that was a motivating factor for many people in wanting to legalize this, to try and even out those justice system outcomes. And that again gets even into a more complex, separate issue, but that's really, I think, the basis for many people's intentions.
Can I ask a simpler question? The first question on there, do we regulate the use of alcohol in public spaces?
In Minnesota, you can't walk down the street and drink a beer. So this would be similar to, you can't walk down the street and use cannabis. So it's similar to Vegas rules. Now in other cities, you might be able to do that, and they've deemed that it was okay. And I think by regulating that here, this would be similar, saying this is not appropriate in public spaces. It would not limit it in private or on private property where that conduct was allowed. That's how I would equate it.
We have thoughts on that? I think we should maybe just go through the bullet points here.
On the first one, I would say yes. Just like we regulate smoking in parks, we can see yeah, I think that's a natural fit.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think I see where you're getting at.
Yeah, I would agree with that as well.
I think the answer to that is yes. On to the second one. So in terms of how many licenses would be allowed, this is more pertaining to
The edible,
The
the low
okay.
potency hemp
Edibles.
products,
Yep.
edibles.
Is there any frame of reference that we're supposed to base that on in terms of number of licenses for that?
John, you have more experience.
Oh, yeah, I think you want to just look at it from a zoning perspective as far as what maybe makes sense locally. I mean, the tough thing about the regulation of the edible cannabinoid products versus the cannabis businesses they're going to come later, that we're going to regulate that, is I think when you establish a cannabis business, what the legislature is envisioning, and it's probably accurate on this, is that when you have such a business, that's going to be the primary, what they sell, right? It's going to be those type of products. That's what they're in business for. With the edibles, and the lower potency hemp edibles or edible cannabinoids, you're talking about gummies and like the liquor stores that sell these seltzers that are used with the THC. Usually you're not talking about a place that hangs out a shingle just to sell that. You're talking about a business that also sells at a liquor store, tobacco shop, some things like that. So what I would suggest is think about it in terms of where that type of business would be located, and then think about whether you want to limit the number within that district. And I think you want to have at least one zoning district, and you want to, I think at least a couple of registrations would probably be appropriate and reasonable. To be completely transparent, as Matt alluded to, this law is going to change. It has changed. It's going to change a number of times before the next couple of years are even up. So we don't know. Some of the gray areas haven't been all ironed out. It's I find nothing in the law that says we can't curtail the number of applicants or registrants. So I think we should take that authority if that's what we want to do. If we're told that we can't do that at some point in the future, we can adjust. But I think the absolute main point is there are time, place, and manner restrictions that you can impose, and they do in the section that deals with lower potency hemp edibles, again, the other name now for edible cannabinoids used by 342, they do specifically yield to local zoning. And that's why you'll see in the draft that I put here, I specifically called out that this provision would be considered a zoning regulation or restriction for those purposes, and that's the reason for that. So the idea being that you know, we can decide where they go and how many, maybe, but we can't completely ban them. And if you have them nowhere, then that's kind of the equivalent of everywhere, as far as the state's concerned.
Can you limit them to, can you limit the sale of edibles to a licensed higher THC vendor only?
Good question. The issue with that is the moratorium itself and the authority under the moratorium only applies to the higher potency items. So if those can be kicked off until the 2025, they specifically did not list edible cannabinoids within that same authority for us there. So I would suggest that the answer to that, at least for now, is no. Maybe at some point in the future that could be consolidated. That's an open question and a good one. But as of right now, no. I think you do have to allow something presently. As soon as the state starts taking their registrations, I think we're a pass-through entity, kind of like liquor licensing. Here's the form. Does it clear zoning? Yes or no, right? And if we have something in our zoning regulations that say you can't have it here, but it can go here, then we can answer no in certain circumstances.
Sir, is there anything that's out of bounds for zoning? If we said it's only be zoned in industrial, or, what's the other?
TCR?
Well, I was thinking about something a little more outrageous, like public institution. You can buy in the cemetery, there's a vendor there.
I would steer you away from anything that could be viewed as an outright frustration of the sale of it as a whole. You want to create an opportunity for it to be sold somewhere where you think it's appropriate and in maybe a limited amount. But I think if you put it under in an area where it's a de facto, ban,
Yeah.
I think you're probably going to have some problems with that.
Commercials probably only.
I think we could look at TCR or rural commercial too, so that
Yeah.
it's more isolated.
Whoops,
And you
food
try to-
land use. Let me get this.
Could we actually get that up?
I'm gonna grab the zoning. I pulled up land
We
uses.
can't
Then
say
give me
something
just a
like
moment.
commercial, but
I wouldn't
can't
do
be
commercial because
within-
then you'll end up with it downtown, and I don't think that's the.
let me finish, so it's commercial, but you can't be within 2,500 feet of a public park.
I actually do believe you could do something like that, yes.
I'm going off past experiences
Sure.
on sales and those kind of things, and the restrictions were such and stuff, you can put it in certain places, but
Well,
those people selling didn't want to go there.
And it would have to pass the radius test where, if you drew the circles around each of them and everything was covered, then
Yeah,
we
yeah.
obviously that would work.
miles of apart.
Yeah.
Right.
2,500 feet of a park, 2,500 feet of a school property, those kind of things. I mean, that's in other communities that are using that. We don't have some of those things around here, but
No, it's a good point. That's another, when I talk about the time, place, and manner restrictions, the statute actually contemplates some of those. So you can put those restrictions appropriate distances from those types of other uses. And I think the legislature acknowledged that is a reasonable zoning restriction on it. So you can draw it up different ways, but I think what you have to do is there has to be a legitimate place where a business could operate, and then,
your comment of we don't want to limit it to that. I'm
well,
trying to add the extra to commercial, industrial, something, but then the restrictions, you can't be within this distance of a public park, school,
The
ball
legislature,
field, anything like that.
they made it like, basically, we have to have it
Yeah,
somewhere, and
yeah.
I'm gonna vote, I am not for this, and I'd be willing to say we're not allowing it, and let them bring the fight to us. We probably lose, so I wouldn't advocate it as a council. I'm against it. I think it's bullshit.
But if we vote not to put any restrictions in, the default is there's no restrictions in regulation, right?
Yep.
So there's
No, we
gonna be-
restrict all of it. We vote to restrict all of
Right,
it.
but then if
What-
a business comes in and wants to do it, and they say they're.
They can't.
and then-
Fight them. stand up for what you believe in and your values.
And I don't disagree, I don't like it either, but I think your point, I don't know that we win it.
I know. You don't win every fight.
So deal with it when it comes, or when we lose it.
Yeah,
Then deal with it.
whatever. I'm not gonna legislate something that is against federal statute.
The problem is, once it's here, you can't roll back. So if you lost on, if somebody came into our commercial district down in the new downtown and opened up a facility, and then we tried to close them down and they sued us and won, now we've got precedents that basically statute says, and the courts say they can be in that area.
But where else is it supposed to be?
Well, that's the fine line, to Jeremy's point, and to what Dean's saying, you know, we need to think of constructive ways to put it in an area where we really want to limit it, but yet not be
Like,
burdensome.
where would it,
That's-
like, where is that place?
That's the tricky question, right?
The only place that I'm really happy with, when I look at the map, is rural commercial and transitional rural commercial. I don't like industrial because it's too close to downtown, at least in the core area of the city. I would be okay maybe on the outlying areas. But of the choices that we have, I feel like that's
down
the
in the
best.
southeast corner of the town,
No, it's up in the upper left.
I'm just saying, in the center of
Well,
town.
what's so special, about that? I mean, what's the difference between up by Stormins and Crossroads?
Well, the only difference is there's only one area. But the question, and I would have is, eventually that area gets rezoned to something else, right, as the Musa line moves out.
Then you'd have to
Some point,
revisit it.
that might be after I'm dead, but they'll have to rezone it to something else. And I wonder about the burdensome on that area to the people that don't see increased traffic.
It's already terrible traffic on 19 and 30, when I put it there.
I'm not sure this draws a lot of traffic. I guess I don't know what the outcome would be.
I don't know that anyone knows specifically yet.
Can you restrict it to size of facility?
No. No, you're dealing really with where a business can establish itself in keeping with the other aspects of your city code.
You had made a comment that
Can we
this
develop?
can't be the only thing they sell. I mean,
No, it
Could
could,
we say, if that's your business, that's it, you're not selling soda, bottled water, nothing else, we can't do that restriction.
no, good, very good question. But no, I don't believe you can do that. There have been attempts to regulate it concurrent with other licensing. I actually preferred that model because you can imagine that liquor stores, tobacco shops, places that already have carding protocols in place and keeping it away from children, things like that, that know this, that have been subject to inspections and that sort of testing. They're better equipped to deal with this sort of thing. So it would make sense, for example, to say, well, you can have a registration if you also concurrently have a tobacco license, for example, right? The problem with that is 342 is likely going to preempt our ability to do that as soon as the state starts registering these. And they will say, they're not asking the question about do they have a city license or not. They don't care. It simply, does it comply with zoning? So really the only ask they have of us is do they pay the fee that you required? Have they done what they need to do at the state level? And is it compliant with city zoning? So that would be where we want to.
What happens if, let's say there's 2 licenses that we decide to offer, and somebody takes out the license but never actually builds a facility or starts selling the product and just squats on the license? What happens then? Will that trigger anything? Do we have to issue more because there's not anything actually being sold?
It's a good question. I don't know that I've ever looked at that issue specifically, but I guess I would argue that in that scenario, as long as we've empowered at least the 2 registrants to operate business, even if they choose not to use them, I mean, that would be fine.
Can you develop a new zoning district for this?
I would advise against that. Yeah, you could try to do that, but I think that would be looked at as a de facto.
And the whole state in power.
Well, as long as you have.
Do we need to, so maybe then the appropriate vehicle might be setting a low license fee so that someone can obtain the license and it's not incumbent upon them to generate a large profit from the license that's there.
Yeah, but the max you should charge is not even very much.
It's half of what's listed in there. We're allowed to,
Maybe we should take a map of the
So it means make it happen.
registered Democrats and have these places be just right where, in the confluence of where the bluest areas in Corcoran are, since they wanted this legislation.
We're brainstorming right now, we aren't segregating or doing anything, we're just brainstorming.
I'm just saying.
I'm gonna guess that's not allowed.
At one point.
Yes, it is.
During the
You can
original
totally
conversation.
discriminate on the basis of political party. That's legal. They're not a protected class.
That's true, they're not.
When we
Right.
started this conversation, I'm trying to remember what was said, and if I say it incorrectly, I thought somebody had mentioned that the liquor stores don't even want the responsibility of doing something like this, the current ones we have. Weren't even interested in those kind of licenses and such. Did I dream it? Did I?
Dean, I think what you're talking about is at the time when the 2022 law went into effect, you couldn't be at a liquor.
Oh, yeah,
Well,
of course.
Exclusive liquor stores, I believe.
Oh, I understand, yes. Initially, when the 2022 legislation came out, and if you recall, that was at the end of the session. It was very, very short and not much detail on it, and just kind of kicked the door open on the edible cannabinoids.
Right.
What they neglected to do, and I think it was because it might have called more attention to it, was they did not concurrently alter the liquor licensing section of state law that has a finite list of things that a liquor store can sell, and edible cannabinoids, of course, was not on it. So what that meant was just about anybody could, but a liquor store could not. That was
Okay.
corrected in 342. They've made that a part of it. Yep.
Clarification.
I would say, I like Dean's idea of the 200 or 2,500 feet or whatever, some distance from parks and public places.
Let's just put a star in the middle of our city and say no closer than 3 miles.
Yeah, perfect.
One thing I would think about
And
recommending
go down
also,
to John Bottom, county mindset, bring it on.
You know, they don't prosecute any crimes, but
this
they'll
one
find
will
the
go,
time
yeah.
to immediately come out and
Right.
somehow prosecute a city council.
one thing I would recommend on the permitting is making them non-transferable if there's gonna be a limited number. So what I've seen in some cities, if, for instance, that have a limited number of liquor licenses or things like that, that places start selling the rights to those if they're gonna go out of business, or if that rights are attached to that property, it increases property value because they've obtained the license. So making sure that if we do that, I would recommend making it non-transferable so that if the person purchasing it only gets it from the city and it only costs our prescribed amount. Because otherwise, as you said, you might get either transferring of them either independently or depending on if they're tied to zoning and property. Now all of a sudden that property value can be influenced because you can transact those types of substances there.
So I'd say we,
I was just gonna be on that. One thing I would suggest too is we don't allow temporary permits. Otherwise, we're gonna have people coming in and buying festivals and whatnot.
Yeah, this would only contemplate a structure of X number of registrants, and then the registration would be just on the annual basis for it. I would expect the state will have a protocol prohibiting transfer, but to Matt's point, it wouldn't be bad to have belts and suspenders on that one.
I
So.
think we include some language on transfer, some language on the distance, like Dean was saying. And can we potentially kick this to when we, assuming we decide to have a public hearing prior to adoption, the specific zoning or, zoning district to be decided then?
I think we can look at doing
You can, I think the public notice that you're gonna send out will be will be more effective if you have one that's nominated, so that those that are affected know whether they should show up or not.
Gotcha. I would assume it's gonna be some sort of commercial or potentially industrial, and we're not gonna do it in residential, not downtown.
Registered voters, Democratic registered voters,
Zoning districts.
I want it,
So
I got it.
we could, we do have some time to put this into place. We don't have we have until the 25th of August was when the moratorium went into effect last year. So we would have a couple meetings to look at this. So we could bring back some options and do the public hearing on the 10th or the 24th. So we could look at doing, bringing, or we could even discuss it on the 27th to see, providing a map of what it would look like if we were to put in, here are a couple options and here's where the radius would be. We could look at something like that and bring that on the 27th and then hold the public hearing on either the 10th or 24th.
I'd recommend we do that.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna ask the licenses. We could limit the number. I would be in favor of setting the limit relatively low, as low as we think is feasible. Does that get issued to a person or to a property or a legal entity?
Unclear, because the state hasn't developed their licensing process yet, but I would anticipate it will be either. It'll be an entity or a person, correct, yeah.
But the entity or person or entity could only do it in that zoning district that you agreed to.
If we have no zoning restriction, that there could be as many registrations, licenses, as the state can process, so.
No, but I mean, what he was saying, if we have it, if you can buy it registered to a property or to an entity or person, when they apply for the permit, is that what you're saying, Jeremy? Yeah. So, if we restrict to a zoning area, they would effectively have to either own or rent or lease property in that zoning area to
That's correct.
effectively use it. So it could go to an entity outside the city, but they would still have to operate in that zoning district.
That's correct, yes.
Is there any issue with this point about going to like a rural commercial area, zoning area, if we have a limited area within the city that zoning district applies to?
I think as long as you provide a reasonable opportunity for the business within the city, I think that's sufficient. You can decide which zoning district or districts you want it to go in. So
we're renting dumpsters out on 19 and 30 and you could sell.
Well, but it would have to be a place where it's also concurrently permitted to conduct a commercial activity, right? So you couldn't restrict it by other zoning. In other words, right, you couldn't have a zoning contradiction that way. So as long as that district permits sales of that, just sales to customers that way, and you provided a reasonable opportunity, maybe nobody registers, you don't know. But they could, but then they're based on whatever limitations you put on it. So on one hand, you can look at it as one way to address it would be find a more remote section of the city that's away from other things. Another way to look at it would be to put it in an area where it would be more anticipated that you would have an applicant that would be equipped to handle it. The liquor store, tobacco shop examples we talked about. And while I don't think we can concurrently require another city license with it by preemption, I do think that the natural result of doing that is you tend to get those type of licensees that also will take this registration. So that's another way to think about this.
In the interest of time, Mr. Mayor, can we just give our thoughts and feelings on each of these questions and then attack, or let you guys go after whatever for us to talk at our next meeting or the next couple of meetings?
Yep, that sounds
Just
great.
how we
Work
feel
out well.
individually on each one of these questions?
Yeah, go for it. try to refine where what zoning district
Yeah, so
at a
we,
future meeting.
But how many licenses, can we just say 2 right now?
for sake of
One.
discussion, we could put in 1 or 2.
Can it be one? I don't know that it,
Unclear.
okay.
I think 2 would be safer than
Yeah.
1, but you could put what you want on there. I think any attack of the legislation itself is gonna come from an entity that feels that they weren't given a fair opportunity under the state law. So, the most that you think you can handle in a given zoning district, is the best protection. But if you think that 1 is all we can handle, then you can say that.
I think 2 is probably more defensible position, but.
I mean, depending on the zoning district, right?
2 depending on
If
zoning.
you go commercial,
I would
if you go
say that.
commercial rural, just thinking hypothetically, what's out in that area, downtown? So someone would get a license and either town thumb does it or they hope to lease space within town thumb.
Right. So
So
maybe,
you're really limited in that way, even if you have 2.
Or they'd have to buy a property
Mhm.
and create.
Well, you just buy a property and turn it into some type of commercial.
Wouldn't that be some sort of unfair burden if you only say you can sell cannabis at town farm?
Well,
Well, there are a number of properties. You can subdivide a property and create more property.
Well, if there's no, I,
Well, I
whatever.
mean,
No, it-
I think,
Accomplishes what
what
we're
if
saying.
we, for the public
Mhm.
notice said 2, and
Yeah.
then
I think if,
based on discussion, if the zoning ordinance, or if the zoning district we end up choosing makes more sense to have 1, we would amend it to 1.
I think we can certainly do that. I think if council's comfortable, we bring back a map at the July 22nd or 27th meeting with potential zoning districts and how they would, with the 2,500 feet is what I heard.
I just threw a number out there.
Do we have a
I'd say
preference
1,
on distance?
2 months, 3 months.
Should this go to planning since it involves zoning?
I don't think there's time.
Can we do something
that's
too,
also a problem.
just by what Jeremy was talking about and stuff? I'd rather have the license attached to a property owner, not somebody from outside the city. So could it be limited to a resident could only purchase that? No, we can't do anything like that.
No, yeah, it would have to be an open process. The only local restriction they're yielding to really is zoning. And the zoning can't be person-specific, of course.
So we can't say you can get a license, but you gotta own that property in that.
You'd only be able to conduct the activity in the area that it's zoned, in whatever you designate. So if you designate a commercial district,
Well,
you
what I'm
have to
saying
own a
is
property in the commercial.
They have to be an owner, they couldn't rent. You see what I'm trying to do? I've been trying
Yeah,
to lighten
That
things
would
up.
be,
but
yeah,
Right.
that'd be alcohol, right? Yeah, that would be totally anti-constitutional.
Would screw everything else. Okay. Thanks, I'm just trying to
Yeah,
tighten
no,
everything up.
So I think for the second one, we have game plan to come back at the.
With zoning districts, yeah.
Come back at the 27th. Alternate idea could be, if we do want to, since there was some discussion about planning commission, we could bring the topic and the ordinance as written to the planning commission on the 3rd. Because there's not a requirement for a public hearing, we could do a public hearing at the planning commission, but we could just have a simple discussion there, or we could bring it to you all and then bring it on the 3rd to planning commission. If you do want to get some feedback, you would need to adopt any regulations by August 24th.
And Mr. Mayor, if I may, the ordinance in front of you presently was deliberately designed not to be a part of the zoning code, partially because of that reason we talked about from earlier, where, the analogy I use is, in your zoning, you're gonna decide where the paint store goes, but not what kind of paint they sell, right? And so the cannabis, edible cannabinoids tend to be sold inside of other businesses, so it's not a good fit directly in the zoning code itself. However, it is a zoning restriction to say where it can go, it just doesn't locate itself within our zoning code. Therefore, it doesn't require planning commission review. You can certainly do that, but I agree we do want to be cognizant of our moratorium coming off. on the 25th, so we just want to get it figured out by then preferably.
For sure. Well, what are your guys' thoughts on having it go to planning for at least a discussion? If not even, not necessarily a public hearing, but just.
I don't have an issue with anything, like the planning or parks commission do that, so.
Yeah, let's go ahead and add it to planning on the 3rd, and then plan on bringing it back to us. We'll probably have to be the 24th then, wouldn't it?
Yes, so we would,
And that gives us over a month to think about it too.
so I would recommend we bring it back on the 10th after the planning commission
Oh,
meeting.
would we be able to
Just
turn
so
it on that quick?
just so we could talk about it and then we'd have the public we could finalize for a public hearing on the 24th. If we're comfortable with that.
Supplement to the packet, following week with their comments, right?
We could. If you're comfortable with that.
So on down to the question, does the city want to repeal the moratorium on the sale of?
I'd say want is a strong word, but the
That's
alternative.
cannabis products or edibles?
That's
That
on the
was
edibles.
on edibles, I think with the
Alternative
timeline that
body,
we're
yeah.
talking about now, it doesn't make sense to do a repeal. If we had
Okay.
implemented everything by the 24th, it might make sense to repeal it.
Then the next one, are there fee schedule suggestions for licensure?
I would say the most that
Most
we're
we could
allowed,
charge.
which is what, 120, is it half of what's?
Half of what's listed on there,
Half
yes.
of 250?
Yep,
I don't
half
know
of
that
the
that's a
250.
meaningful step to take. I don't think it's high enough to deter somebody who's interested. I would say just make it $15, whatever the processing cost is. I get the restriction from the zoning code rather than from the fee amount.
Well, it costs more for the city to process an application, $15.
Yeah.
So I would say it's higher than that, but I hear you. It's not gonna deter anyone.
How much is a reasonable number? 150?
If one of the
I don't
council
think we can do
people
150.
processed it, since we get paid like a dime an hour, then we could charge $15 and be good.
I'd say
Yeah.
go with the 125.
Yeah.
on that,
I think.
just to cover costs.
Yep.
Yeah. That work for at least 3 of us? Okay.
The paraphernalia side?
Paraphernalia, I think we got that explained. We all on board with the reasoning of why and what that's applying to again.
I would point out that the delay would leave a gap in there where it's not illegal with it being pushed out, which we can manage internally, obviously, so did want to point that out, that it would be up 1 month where it would be legal.
The paraphernalia repeal kicks in on August 1st.
Gotcha.
And then we already talked about the last one, yeah.
How much of a concern is that to you, Matt, of that gap?
I think in that amount of time, we can manage it internally with staff and with our attorneys, so it might be worth it to try and keep it together, just instead of splitting things out. Probably worth keeping it together and just managing it operationally.
Sounds good. And then public hearing, I think we talked about doing that at the later August meeting, or the 10th.
I think we would like to do that following just final direction on which zoning district to include in the notice, so people know which.
And what's the notice requirement?
The notice requirement, there's not a notice requirement for this type of ordinance amendment. There is not a requirement to do one. We have done so for other items in the past when we've done lawful gambling and body cameras, a few of those things that are more not necessarily controversial, but people have interest in.
So, my reservation on that would be, we're gonna have a lot of people that don't want it. And it sounds like that doesn't matter. So you're gonna have, it's not gonna be that,
Productive?
it's gonna be not productive. And it'll raise a stink, and it'll raise awareness that we will have to have we will have to allow somebody to come in and set up shop. So I almost think it should go through a consent agenda and just keep it low.
Yeah.
And
I think if we're challenged in anything, though, we should probably consider noticing based on our prior practices.
don't we have to notice?
So an ordinance, any proposed ordinance has to be posted to your city website 10 days before it is reviewed at the council. So we would have to, if we're going to put it into effect on either the 10th or the 24th, it would be the 14th of August or the 31st of July.
Has to be posted
On the city's website.
City
In
website.
draft form, I know you all have the ability to make changes to the ordinance as you see fit. If there are things that we've discussed and need to amend, we just have to have a draft.
But in terms of
available.
calling a actual public hearing,
You don't have to post in the paper or anything else.
For this particular one, we do not. For the moratorium, the state statute related to this requires that we hold a public hearing if we're going to do a moratorium.
for the new one,
For the new recreational
okay.
marijuana and the items that accompany.
Do you know how many daily clicks we get on our webpage?
Michelle would have a better handle on that.
Half of them are probably from us.
You hit easy.
Exactly. To that point, I wouldn't worry about it.
Okay.
We will plan on noticing as we would any proposed ordinance and then bringing, you'd like us to bring it forward to the planning commission for some feedback, and then we'll bring forward, then likely we would not bring we just bring what their recommendation would be to, for adoption, and we'd bring that on the 10th, and likely if we needed to table it until the 24th, if there was additional need for studying, if there are a couple options and we want some additional time to decide, we could look at that.
I'd say we do that, and then we all have our homework of trying to come up with something, bring it up at the next meeting if we have any brilliant ideas, make it work. So,
Mr. Mayor, if I may, yeah, just as a part of that consideration and kind of the homework that you referenced, remember that you're considering right now the location for the edible cannabinoid sales, so that's 0.3 THC limitation. Anything above that becomes the higher potency stuff. In that case, you may not have to allow any business, but you may have to allow one. So you want to start thinking about that one business. If you had to allow it, where would it go? And to Councilmember Schultz's point, maybe you want that in a similar location so that if we're allowed to co-locate or require co-location of those, we could.
I guess I was thinking that's what we'd be resolving in the next two meetings, planning in this, but you're suggesting do that now?
No. I say you're talking about the homework and just I'm
Gotcha,
trying to help kind
gotcha.
of frame the issue because sometimes they run together. The statute's very, very long, and you're talking about the higher potency stuff that won't be, as long as we pass the moratorium, won't be in play until 25. And then you're talking about the edible cannabinoids, and it's possible that you might decide to treat those differently.
Right.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. Good deal. I think we've talked with some of that for now, but
So one last piece we just wanted to confirm is we do have to hold that public hearing for the interim ordinance. Do we want to go ahead and consider an interim ordinance for those other regulations?
just for the
The high potency,
they could
the
have done
high,
this in a more
yes.
confusing way.
The high potency item, everything related from testing
Yes.
to sale, and
I think yes, we have to. So.
we're all
And
comfortable with
then
that.
I'd leave that to your discretion in terms of timing, if it makes sense to do them together, or if we just want to knock that out at a next meeting.
Excellent, thank you all.
Thanks for your patience, you guys.
Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. a lot of information and kind of dueling ideas, so we appreciate it.
And I'm dealing with a little bit of crazy that's up here, so thanks.
Matt, you were talking about the, or Matt or John, when you talked about the pathway that different states have gotten here. But Minnesota, ours is unique in a lot of ways, how that all went down. Okay, so we'll move on to 10B, which is just calling of work sessions. Those days and times work for at least 3 of us, hopefully all of us. Which were they? August 10th and September 14th at 5:30. So I think we'd have one next 4 meetings.
Yes, so we will.
2 budget.
2 budget, and then 1 logo, and then 1 is the underlying zoning districts. We talked about as one of our goals, looking at underlying zoning districts for industrial and commercial, in particular related to some of the industrial applications we saw, and checking out those zoning ordinances. So we just want to understand if we need to make that underlying zoning district project any bigger, and want to understand what kind of changes we might be wanting to make.
My only issue is I was expecting a family vacation August 10th.
Gotcha.
I would be gone that week, may not be, but
Well,
I may not be
make it
here.
It should
And if I show,
Yeah.
Mayor may not be disappointed, so.
Yeah, no, I think that should work out. I know I can make it, or anticipate I can. I think we just need 3, give the feedback. Are we
And
gonna
if
have
I-
a logo to look
if
at
I-
right before then?
We will have some design elements and kind of what we're thinking for it to look like. We want to double check with council to see if there are any components you want in the logo, and then understand the public engagement portion.
When was that, September 14th?
That one is August 10th.
When is the September one?
The September 14th one is the zoning districts, and that is the 2nd week in September.
And again, I will let you know
Perfect.
if I change that date, but right now, not here on the 10th.
Okay.
Everything else I can do.
Then I will go ahead and call the work sessions for city logo project, and the second topic, Jess had it worded better.
Underlying zoning district.
Thank you. On August 10th and September 14th respectively at 5:30 p.m.
Thank you.
Then we are on to the closed session. Thank you. Under the authority of Minnesota Statute 13D.05, subdivision 3C3, the city is permitted to close a meeting to consider offers and counteroffers for the purchase or sale of real or personal property. The city council is going into closed session to consider an offer for real estate and personal property. The following properties are the subject of the closed meeting. PID 2311923410007, PID 2411923330001, PID 2411923330002, PID 2411923340001. I want to make sure I said those correctly. The first 2 numbers, for the first one was 23 and the second was 24. Hopefully I didn't make
Yes.
it too confusing.
Yep, no, that is correct.
We'll
They
have
end
to
up
close
being
that.
on different sides of the section line, so hence the different changes.
Recording stopped.